Hey, before we get started, everybody needs help. Everybody. And Dr. Diane Call is there to help you. She runs creative therapy services, and she combines creative and practical strategies for various mental health and wellness issues. For more information, contact Diane and ask her about whether she can help you or not. You can check out her website, creativetherapyservices.net.
Bring the museum back to life.
You know, people sit out on the front porch hoping people will come by.
Go forth and do good. It's insane. I have the most understanding wife in the world.
I treat everybody the same thing.
Oh, that's the other thing I love about Marietta. It's like a melting pot.
You are listening to Marietta Stories. Each week, veteran podcaster Bill Nowicki brings you the heartwarming, interesting, and fun stories from the people that make the community of Marietta, Georgia, a place to call home. Here's your host, Bill Nowicki.
This is Bill Nowicki. Welcome to Marietta Stories. I have Pam Stone. You might remember Pam from the show Coach, where she played Judy Watkins for, I think, 9 seasons. But before all that happened, now she's doing a bunch of other stuff we'll get into. But before all that happened, she was a Marietta girl. Welcome to Marietta Stories, Pam.
Well, thank you, Bill. How great to be back in a matter of speaking. You sound
yes.
I have to say, you know, I hosted a syndicated radio show for 10 years. And when you and I were just talking before we went on air, you were saying, I have to warn you, I'm not a radio guy. I'm a nuclear engineer. Mm-hmm. And you almost sounded kind of halting in your speech. But then as soon as you started, you were right there.
I flipped the switch.
You flipped the switch. You're on autopilot now. You're far more talented than you're giving yourself credit for.
Well, thank you very much. No, I just love Marietta. There's so many great stories here, and I get so excited to talk to people because every time I interview somebody, I get more insight in the way our community is stitched together, and it's wonderful for me to be able to do this for folks. And, you know, I get to meet great people, so it all works out.
Well, and now, and I wasn't aware of the podcast, and now I get to listen, so I'm excited.
That's right. Hopefully bring you back. And I interviewed, just to let you know, I interviewed a 91-year-old lady whose great-grandfather had a house in Marietta, and he was a general in the Confederate Army. And when she was a little kid, she used to rake the magnolia leaves off his grave every Sunday.
No kidding. And where was that grave? Where was the grave?
It's somewhere in the Confederate cemetery. But her last name was Perkin, but she was so sweet, and she had a book full of pictures and memorabilia, and but they burnt the best story. I'll cut to the really good piece, but the best story was they could see the Yankees were coming. The battle was in Kennesaw Mountain, and they were coming into town. So her great grandmother took the silver, put it in a burlap sack, and threw it in the pond so she could retrieve it later because the Yankees were going to steal it. So
if you actually even read Gone with the Wind, there's a whole chapter devoted to that, you know, when Sherman's coming through and they grab everything they have to hide and bury it back behind the house, and they take the few stoats they have, the baby pigs and the boars, and then they run them into the woods because they know the Yankees will take them and eat them, and they'll all starve. It was fascinating what people did. They were smart to do that. And it makes you wonder what's still buried out there that nobody is even aware of.
That's true. Maybe that'll be another episode. But anyway, last week I interviewed a pet psychic, but let's not go into that.
I love that stuff too, yeah.
Well, I like to mix it up. I mean,
sure.
I want to have... Anyway, so let's talk about you. So where did you grow up in Marietta?
I grew up on Woodlawn Drive, which ran between Paper Mill and Lower Roswell, and then Johnson Ferry. And my father had bought an acre and a quarter property on Woodlawn. I think there was maybe 7 homes on all of Woodlawn. Powers Road was still gravel, and it was very, very rural. And of course, Perkin's grocery store was up at the top, as was, let me think here, of course, Mount Bethel, all that. My father actually used to have a plane at quote unquote Park Air. He built the house on it, and I think he built the house in 1967. We had moved briefly to New Zealand, and this is when we came back. And so he built this house, and I think he built it for about $32,000, a little brick ranch. The funny thing is one of my relatives sent me a clipping because that house was sold recently. There's two parts to the story. My father was the king of cheap, so everything he put in that house was, it was like if he got a deal on the wall-to-wall carpeting, he put that in. The windows were cheap, and every time it rained heavily, the basement flooded every time. And I think it was that the foundation was compromised. So when I get a photograph in the mail of our house, which they had put a second story on the house, and of course, gutted and done everything to it, for sale for just under $1 million. And I looked at this thing, and of course, it bore no resemblance to our little 1,800 square foot house.
Right.
And all I could think was, I bet that son of a bitch floods every time it rains in the basement. Because if they built it on top of on the original foundation, it would definitely be flooding every single time. When we first moved there, it was well before the Chattahoochee Country Club was built and the Atlanta Country Club was built. And it was a modest rural neighborhood. Fainview Farm was down at the bottom of the road. Kings Cove hadn't been built yet. So what happened was then this very exclusive neighborhood grew up around us. Suddenly the Atlanta Country Club was built, the Chattahoochee Country Club, and there's all these, big homes and wealthy families moving in, and we still had our horses in the backyard. And
what was that like? Did that affect you in any way?
Oh yeah, it's why I live where I live now. When I was finished with Coach in California, I knew I didn't want to stay in California. Couldn't afford to stay in California because what I wanted was my own farm, my own horse farm, which is all I've ever wanted. And, that's just crazy money in California. You're talking millions of dollars for, 5 acres. When I started looking around the country where I wanted to settle, I had a feeling I'd probably come back to the South. And when I came to the Carolinas, I'm in Landrum, South Carolina, which is right on the border of North Carolina and Tryon, big horse country here. But the reason it was so appealing to me to come here is that this town has 2,000 inhabitants, and the downtown, when I first bought property here in 1987, was closed up. There was one restaurant that was open from 11 to 2 and a gas station, and that was it. And I thought, this is great. This is just like Marietta. When I grew up, when it was just Perkins. That was it. And my mother, we had to drive to go grocery shopping. She drove to Sandy Springs to the Ogletrees up there, across the old one-lane bridge over the Chattahoochee.
Right.
So that is exactly why I'm living where I live now, because it reminds me so much of where I grew up before it became just ostentatious with, McMansions everywhere and these 5,000 square foot houses on these postage lots. It was an enchanting childhood, and I feel privileged to have had the childhood I did. And that's when I could hook up with Jennifer Allen down the road, and we would ride. Our parents never had a clue where we were, and of course there weren't cell phones or anything there. And we would ride our horses down the road, down Woodlawn, and we would cross Paper Mill, and there were all these woods back there, and you'd come out on the other side where the country club was being built, and we could ride to Cindy Trimble's house and pick her up. And, we all had horses in our backyards, and it sounds very upscale, the equestrian set, but it wasn't. We just had these $200 horses in our backyards that we all had to take care of ourselves. And then we would ride what we called the kudzu trails down to the Chattahoochee River, where you just cut through. There was trails that were always grown over by kudzu, and it always kind of, when you would be riding back at twilight, sometimes we wouldn't get home till like 9 o'clock at night. It was just unbelievable to me, the freedom that we had.
Right.
I'm sure there's some people listening that are horrified saying, well, your parents were just negligent. But
right.
We just met up and we went out in a gang. We rode along the Chattahoochee River and would come back. And what a marvelous childhood of freedom and opportunity just to be in nature all day long with no fear. And there were certainly, it wasn't that there weren't things that could have happened to us. I mean, we certainly had rode past the man that drove in front of us and stopped and exposed himself to us. You know, this sort of things. I'm not saying these were 1950s happy days. There were still things that could have happened, but when you're in a group of kids on horseback and someone does something like that, you just chase his ass. Because you're on 1,000-pound animals, and you chase them for a while, and you deal with it that way. Really?
Did you catch him?
No, I mean, he ran like hell, pulling up his pants and got in his car and ran away. But, you know, I mean, you're not going to be able to outrun a bunch of teenage girls on their, when I say ponies, you know, 15-hand quarter horses, you know, charging towards you. That's Robert E. Lee coming after you. You know, charge!
That's crazy.
And I feel so sorry. I feel so sorry for children today that don't have that unstructured childhood. You know, children that leave school and the life is structured for them, that they have this practice at this time and this practice at this time. And, I mean, we just ran wild.
But you got yourself out. You learned the skills to get yourself out of trouble, I'm sure.
Well, yeah, because you had the fear that your parents were going to beat the hell out of you on top of that. You know, because that's how old I am, is not only was it perfectly socially acceptable and legal for your old man to hit you, but if you were monkeying around, you know, next door, your neighbor could hit you. I mean, I lived pretty much most of my childhood in terror of my father. Not my mother, but yeah, I mean, my father had come to this country from Germany, and he suffered no fools. You know, I mean, he grew up an impoverished childhood, and as far as he was concerned, he'd done everything he needed to do. He'd put a nice roof over our head, and we had 3 meals a day, which was a hell of a lot more than he ever had growing up. So, by God, you better walk the freaking walk in my house, you know. But it was great times, and I remember riding to Perkin store with my sister. I mean, you know, to ride from Lower Roswell, to ride from Woodlawn to Perkins, and we'd tie the horses up outside. We would do this once a week, and doing it during the summer, during vacation, it's like 95 degrees, riding bareback. So, you know, you're in shorts, and you've got horse hair and sweat down your legs. And for some reason, I had to have a yoo-hoo. You know, because we weren't allowed any treats like that at home. So I would buy a cold chocolate yoo-hoo, and then I'd have to have like a moon pie or something chocolate. And I'd be riding home with this like bouncing around on my stomach on this pony, like, you know, it's 95 degrees. And I'd pull over on the horse and I'd vomit. And I would do this pretty much weekly. And that was considered a treat for me. You know, I mean, it was like, you know, the thought of a nice cold yoo-hoo was just everything. And I couldn't just stop there. It would be like, if I just had a yoo-hoo, I'd be all right. But it's like, no, I got to have like a candy bar on top of that. And it was just so much sugar.
Today, that might be considered a eating disorder.
Yeah, that was kind of like a rural approach to anorexia or binging and purging. Yeah. We never had chocolate at the house. And so it was like, you know, we weren't allowed to have Coke or anything like that. So, man, I mean, yeah, we were like meth heads. If you were, you know, saving up your babysitting money, get up to Perkins, and man, you just run riot in there.
Yeah. So talk a little bit about your time in school. What was that like? Were you popular, making a lot of friends?
No, I was, school was not a great experience. I was really, really bullied a lot in school. And, you know, I was 8 feet tall and 100 pounds. Yeah. So, you know, you're on parade whether you want to be or not. You know, when you're that tall as a girl and flat-chested, and the only fashions back then were bell-bottoms and giant platform shoes. They didn't even sell flat shoes. So you had to wear these. But me and Kathy Heineman were the two freaks. You know, we were like these two. I mean, we looked like the number 11 walking down the hall with just these incredibly tall girls. But Kathy was beautiful, and I was not. And so Kathy ended up, as you might know or might remember, seriously involved with John Schneider from the Dukes of Hazzard. I remember him coming to school with her. It was before he got the show, and she was just dating him, and they made a great-looking couple. And then she went on to be Miss Tall America, and I remember...
That's a thing?
Yeah, it's a thing. And her mother, I remember her mother calling the house because she was calling everyone to say that Kathy was going to be on Merv Griffin and everyone to watch. And so we turned on Merv Griffin, and there was Kathy, and she came out, I mean, just looking like $1,000,000 because she was so well proportioned. You know, she had a beautiful figure, and she's a beautiful girl. She still is. You know, if I ever saw her in the hall and we lived on the same street, you know, I would just walk as quickly as I could to kind of get caught in her draft like NASCAR. So I didn't stand out terribly as much because I was like, well, here's somebody else who's very, very tall. I think I was probably the only person in school that didn't get invited to the prom, and I was very unpopular. So yeah, no really great memories from East Cobb or Wheeler.
Did you start developing your comedic sense from that as a way to kind of mitigate some of that bullying?
I didn't do it at high school so much because I didn't really want to open my mouth, because it was sort of thing like when you're already unpopular, if you try to say something funny, then the kids just look at you like, shut up, you're such a dork, shut up, nobody cares what you say. Once I got out of high school, and the interesting thing is, once you're considered a nerd from elementary school into junior high, you stayed at school with those same kids till you graduate in 12th grade. So once a nerd, always a nerd. You know, you're a nerd in 9th grade, you're going to be a nerd when you come back at 10th, 11th, 12th. When I went to college, it was the wildest thing. I mean, I couldn't believe it, because you just go through several years of basically torture. And then I got to college, and I remember like the first week, like 4 guys asked me out. And I thought, no, this is like, I'm going to get pranked here. I really didn't. I thought, this is like some horrible, mean thing that somebody's doing that nobody wants to ask me out. Nobody's going to ask me out. But they actually did, and I couldn't. It was the most shocking thing to me, because once you go to college, you're not with the same people you were in high school.
It was just up in Kennesaw State. It wasn't that far away, but still,
yeah,
it was far enough.
You're right. It was just far enough, because I think most kids from my school probably went on to Georgia,
right.
Georgia Tech or wherever, or Georgia, downtown Atlanta. So I only saw like a couple of people that I knew at Kennesaw, and it was this complete reset. So my sense of humor really developed there, because people were just friendly to me. They were just kind to me and interesting. And I always loved making people laugh. Certainly part of the sense of humor was, if I make fun of myself first, I beat you to making fun of me. Right. And that's something you'll see comedians often do on stage, like John Pignot, or I think he's gone now, but comedians that are very, very obese will often come out on stage and immediately make a joke about being fat. And they do that for 2 reasons. The first reason is they're basically telling the audience, look, I know I'm 400 pounds. I'm just going to address it now so you can relax and feel comfortable laughing at me. And then the second thing, the reason they do it is because if I make fun of myself first, I beat you to it.
Right.
You know, you'll hear stories about people like Richard Pryor, who started doing comedy to stop from getting beaten up by gangs, because he could make them laugh so he wouldn't beat them up. But for me, it was more, I loved making people laugh. I just loved it. And number 2, it was a way of, I was still very hung up on my height, with very, very little self-esteem. And I just thought, well, I'll make jokes about myself first, and then you can't say anything about me, because I'm already controlling the situation. So that's how that works.
What was the first time you were on stage?
I had a problem. I was showing up to high-level meetings at nuclear plants. I'm talking site vice president, plant general manager, engineering director with a backpack on. I knew I needed something more professional. So I checked out my friend Nathan Martin at 795 Whitlock Avenue, a place called Go Forth Goods, and he hooked me up with a leather briefcase. I'm talking the Cooper satchel. And it was super cool when I went back to the nuclear plants and showed up with that baby on. And you too can have that same feeling. Go to goforthgoods.com and check out the 70 products he has. I'm talking about duffel bags, tote bags, briefcases, messenger bags, backpacks, wallets, belts, and other travel accessories. And if it's something you don't like from there, you can make something custom just for you. I'm talking quality components, something you can pass on from generation to generation. And he guarantees it for life. Goforthgoods.com, enter the promo code Marietta Stories, and for a limited time, you can get an extra 25% off. GoForthGoods.com, promo code Marietta Stories for 25% off, but don't wait, it's going to be gone.
The first time I was on stage, which led to my ready demise from Kennesaw College, I was putting myself through college, and I was waitressing at the Punchline. And I just remember I would wait tables at the Punchline. It was a great shift to work if you're in college because you clocked in about 7 p.m., and the first show during the week started at 8 or 9, something like that. And then you clocked out. You were clocking out by 11:30, and then you would work 2 shows and 3 shows Friday and Saturday. But you could make a lot of money quickly. Well, 4 hours a week, 4 hours a night, Tuesday through Thursday. And the Punchline had an incredible reputation in the comedy industry, and they really honed that reputation by only headlining the top-tier comics, whereas you get a lot of clubs in the country, they'll throw anybody up there as a headliner who scratches together 40 or 45 minutes of material. In order to headline at the Punchline, you had to have done at least a Tonight Show or been on a sitcom or done movies. I'm waitressing, and Leno's on stage, Jerry Seinfeld's on stage, Dennis Miller, Paula Poundstone, Paul Reiser, just the top names in the business were coming through that club twice a year. And I just remember like leaning against the back of the room, holding my little waitress tray to my chest, kind of clasping it, thinking, that just doesn't look that freaking hard. It just doesn't look that hard. And I knew they were making good money. And the waitresses, the other waitresses that I worked with, that we were a real gang, good buddies, would go drinking at Carlos McGee's in Buckhead, great club that's no longer there. And so they basically bullied me into getting on stage. I said, you have to get on stage. You're obviously meant to be a comedian. You're always making people laugh. And so the first night I went up on an open mic night and did 5 minutes of all self-effacing material, and the audience was so hot, and I just killed. And I remember driving home on such a high and telling my mom, I know what I'm going to do for a living. And, she'd be painting at the easel. Oh, that's nice, dear. Oh, can you make a living doing that? And I said, well, yeah, you can make a living because there's a lot of clubs on the East Coast, and the Punchline was franchising its name and franchised other punchlines on the East Coast, and there were 12 punchlines you could work as an MC, as an opening act. And so from the day that I got 20 minutes of material together, I was on the road full time. And my first gig ever was opening up for Paul Reiser, and my second gig was touring with Jay Leno for 3 weeks. So I said goodbye to my waitress job. I said goodbye to college. It was like the Billy Joel song, close the shop, bought a ticket to the West Coast. Now he gives them a stand-up routine in L.A. So, and Jay was really mentoring me for quite some time.
In what way?
He would watch my act every night. He would critique me and help me rewrite jokes and get to the punchline quicker with less setup, and was really, really good to me. And then when I moved to L.A., he gave me some really strong advice on, really smart money advice, and saying, don't be like these other guys that move out here and they got to get the flash car and they got to get the flash pad. He said, you got to save your money. Don't be blowing your money. Get an old used car. And I did everything he told me to. And then he had gotten the Tonight Show when he inherited the Tonight Show from Johnny Carson. I had just landed coach, and I lived in West Hollywood, and I was walking to the Beverly Center to go see a movie, and Jay was coming out of the Beverly Center. He'd been there for a book signing, and literally ran into him on the sidewalk in front of it. And he was like, hey, kid, how you doing? I said, I'm great. Good. I'm so happy for you. And he said, yeah, listen, you got the show now. You got coach. I want you on the show. Have your people, call my people. We'll put you on. We'll put you on right away. And it was the kindest thing he could do because he'd only had the show for a month. And, when you get a show like The Tonight Show and you take over that mantle, for the first year, they're only booking A talent, the biggest names, the biggest stars. And I was just a co-star on this sitcom, and I just couldn't believe he was putting me on. But he put me on like his third week having the show, and it went great. I just came on as a seated guest. I didn't do any stand-up.
Oh, really?
Yeah, I came on as I did my stand-up in a conversational way, being interviewed.
Right.
So
he was just serving them over the plate kind of thing.
Yeah, exactly.
That is pretty amazing, though, because they are checking, now that Jay Leno took over, what are the ratings? And that's coming out in newspapers like every week. So you're saying that he's trying to get the A talent on there right away.
Yeah, you're getting the biggest names you can get.
Well, that's sweet of him.
Yeah, he was great. He's always been really, really good. I haven't talked to him for years, but he made a big difference in my career.
Now, how did you get the audition for Coach?
I was performing, and this is another piece of advice Jay gave me, and really this piece of advice can be applied to any career. But he said, you have no control if you're going to be successful or not. You have no control if you're ever going to get a TV show, no control if the audience is going to like you or anybody's ever going to hire you for anything. He said the only control you have is the quality of your act, the quality of your material, the quality of your jokes. And he said, and if you focus on that and none of the other crap, don't focus on being famous or any of that crap. Just focus on the quality of your act. And he said, and you will get to a point where you are so good you can't be ignored, that you'll be going on stage and you'll be blowing off everybody else on stage. Whoever has to follow you is not going to be able to follow you because you've just killed. You've just wiped the deck with the audience. I always took that to heart, and I've always given 100% on stage because I feel like people have paid money to come see a show, and you never know who's in the audience. And so that became very clear. I was performing in Pasadena at the Ice House, which was a great club where people like the Smothers Brothers started, and Steve Martin, and folk rock and all that kind of stuff. And there were two producers in the audience, but I didn't know this. And they were there. They were developing a sitcom about a Southern woman who goes to D.C. and becomes a congresswoman or something. And they were there to see this really cute female comedian from Texas. Really looked a little bit like Meg Ryan in her day. Just really, really cute. And I guess she was nervous, but she had a bad set. She just didn't get many laughs. And that club, like the Punchline, is renowned for having a hot audience, really hot audience. The acoustics are great. The laughs bounce really well around the room.
Yeah.
So I followed her, and I just killed, just freaking killed. And afterwards, I was sitting back in the green room with my manager, and there was a knock on the door, and these two guys come in. One of them was called Sheldon Bull, and he said, I'd like to talk to you. We're working on this sitcom about a Southern woman that goes to Washington, D.C., and really liked what we saw with you on stage tonight. And when we put it together, we'd love for you to come and read for the part. And I said, oh, that's great. So you're working on that right now? And he said, no, we're not working on it right now. We're finishing up. We had an order for this mid-season replacement that we're finishing, and we just have a couple more episodes to write. And I said, oh, what's that called? And he said, Coach. And I said, oh, I haven't heard of that. And he said, yeah, you and the rest of America. He said, it's just a mid-season replacement. It goes on when another show's canceled. It's like number 75 in the ratings or something. And we're like, oh, okay. And he said, so when we're done with that, we'll start with our pilot. As often happens in Hollywood, numbers are exchanged and goodbye, thank you so much. And then you don't hear anything. 6 months later, Sheldon calls my manager and says, well, turns out ABC is crazy about Coach. The execs over there love the show, love Craig T. Nelson, what he's doing with the character, and they want to pick the show up as a real sitcom instead of a mid-season replacement. And they just gave us an order for 13 episodes, and we've written a part that Pam might want to come in and read for. And so, of course, the part was Judy Watkins, and I got the part. And it was really only meant to be a guest part, a one-time appearance, and it turned into 7 years of work. The show ran for 9 years, and I was on it for 7 years. It was still in mid-season replacement mode the week that I was shooting my first episode. we got to go on the air because there was a show called Chicken Soup starring Jackie Mason and Lynn Redgrave. And that's when Jackie Mason had that resurgence in his career. You know, he was the Nebuchadnezzar Jewish comedian, remember? And I don't know if you remember this, Bill, but he had a one-man show on Broadway, and it was a huge hit. And as usual, Hollywood said, it's such a hit, we'll make a sitcom out of it. We'll put him together with this fiery redheaded Irish woman, Roman Catholic, Lynn Redgrave, and it'll be this great, funny romance, thinking because it was a huge hit on Broadway that the rest of freaking America had any clue of who Jackie was or could relate to him at all. So oh my gosh, they put so much money into it, and it went on with great fanfare, and it just bombed. And Roseanne was #1 in the country. And so the show, it lasted 2 episodes, and they yanked it. And then Coach got stuck in on Tuesday night, that Tuesday night behind Roseanne, and overnight we were #2 in the country. And Roseanne was polling about 25 million viewers, and we were holding on to most of those. So, you know, you go from relative obscurity to 25 million people suddenly knowing who you are and recognizing you, which is, you can't get ready for that no matter who you are. But it was great. And Coach was a great show. It was so well written, and especially the first 3 or 4 years, so funny.
Did you have any background in acting? Like, did you know where to move?
No. When I moved to Los Angeles, I knew I'd be going up for auditions, so I studied quite seriously. I hired a private acting coach, and I had worked with a couple of people before that because I wanted to make sure, and this is something else that you can apply to any profession, when you get your chance, when you get a break, when somebody gives you that break that you've been really wanting, don't let them feel like they've made a mistake giving you that break. Make sure that you can rise to the occasion and take that break and kick glorious ass. If you haven't done your homework, because let me tell you, it is so different doing stand-up to acting. It's completely apples and oranges, and you have to know what you're doing. You have to know how to break down a script and have your character go for what they're going for in the scene and know why they're doing it and how you're going to do it and where you're going to move. You know, and there has to be a specific reason why you're moving. You're not just walking around and then that, you know, those things are put together in a week. You know, you show up and do a table reading on Mondays, and then you immediately go into rehearsal, and then we would shoot on Fridays. So you got to pull that whole sucker together. And in the meantime, the writers are changing the script constantly because they're pulling out jokes that aren't working. They're adding on something here and there. And you could be sitting in the makeup chair, you know, and the live audience is in the stage, and you're about to go on in 30 minutes for the first scene, and all of a sudden they hand you 6 pink pages, and they say, take out, you know, in your script, page 18 to 24, and put these in instead, and this is what we're going with. And you're like, oh my God, you know, because you're already scared.
But what was that first moment like when you walked through the fake door and all that? When you looked, you can't even look out at the audience, really. You're supposed to pretend they're not there. I mean, it's just so different.
It is. I mean, and you know, 95% of acting is listening. And because if you're going to react normally, you have to find a way to blot all of that out, blot the audience and the lights and the cameras in your face. And you have to truly organically listen in the dialogue that the person you're swapping dialogue with, if you really listen to them, you're going to react in a completely normal way for your character. You know, you're not going to be just spitting lines out. You're going to be reacting to them if they're in the scene, if their character is coming across with anger or depression or joy, you're going to react to that as you would if you were talking to someone who was behaving in that manner. And my first scenes were all with Craig. You know, Craig T. Nelson.
He had quite the resume.
Yeah, he's a hell of an actor, and it was his show, and his name was on it. Everybody on that show was a strong, strong actor, and I desperately didn't want to be the weak link, and I was. You know, and I was trying so hard. And, you know, you don't get second chances. If you don't pull it off, you're out of there. They'll recast and replace you in an eye blink. I was just really grateful because I look at the first pilot episode that I did, and it was like, okay, but, you know, certainly 4 years later, 5 years later after doing it, when I would watch it, I would almost cringe and think, God, why did I do that? Why did I make this choice? Why did I make that choice? That was like, what am I doing with my arm? You know, you just, it's like, why do I have my arms crossed in every scene? I don't walk around with my arms crossed in real life.
I'm getting nervous just listening to you recount that. So, yeah, I can imagine how tough that must have been.
Yeah, and you don't want to be the first person who blows your lines either, but usually that was Jerry Van Dyke. Jerry Van Dyke generally was the first person to mess up their line, so it was almost a relief because you'd be like, I don't want to be the one, especially if a scene is going great. You know, if a scene is going great and it's so funny and the audience is with you and it's just everything's working and then you stumble over a line, so they got to go cut and come back and you got to try to recapture that magic you have, and the audience has already heard all the jokes, so they're not going to laugh as hard as they did the first time, you know, and so all that pressure is on you as you go out. But Jerry would come out and just go, boo, boo, boo. And he would mess up so often sometimes that then it became so funny. Then you almost wished he wouldn't get it right because he was so funny when he would mess up.
Yeah, he was like a walking blooper reel or something.
Oh my gosh, he was funny.
But that, you know, that gave you some more space, right? To give you more space to be able to kind of not have to worry about being perfect. If everybody was perfect, then that would have been a lot of pressure.
I mean, once the first person made the mistake, then it was like, well, I didn't do it. It wasn't me. You know, and then you go on, and then if you have a mistake, and it was a point of pride for me never to miss a line, never to make a mistake. And then I remember the first time I did, when I said a word wrong or just blanked, and I remember Craig, you know, and Alan, our director, said, cut. And then Craig turned around and looked at me in front of the audience and said, "You made a mistake? You did?" You know, and it was nice, you know.
Yeah, right. That's pretty cool.
Yeah.
Tell me about your life after Coach and what you did after that. And because you said, I read something somewhere that said you wanted to get out of LA before you turned 40.
Yeah, because I knew, I mean, you just don't work. You just don't work as a woman once you hit 40 in LA, even though I was a character actress. I mean, it's more difficult for beautiful women, unless you're like a Julia Roberts or a Nicole Kidman who have a great resume and have aged beautifully. But even for Julia, it's, you know, you go from Pretty Woman and all the films she did, and now films that we see her in now are small films, character films. Mm-hmm. So I'm thinking, well, if people like that aren't getting much work, you know, I ain't going to get that much work. I've been on the road touring as a stand-up when we were on hiatus for the show. So I was really getting burnt out. I was working a lot. I just thought, you know, I want to quit Hollywood before I get fired, you know, before the phone stops ringing and it's humiliating. So
you made the choice.
I made the choice, damn it. And I had my 3 horses out there with me. And so I had bought this farm in Landron in 1993. I'd had property out here in 87 before I had TV work. I was writing on a game show, and so I thought, I can afford, you know, to buy a little bit of land now, and with the idea being, you know, keep working and save up and build a nice little house on that and put a barn and fence it in. And then I got Coach, and that was a bit of a game changer, so I could get more land. The big plan was I'm not turning 40 in LA. I can't do it. It's just so depressing. So Paul, my other half, and I left, and we timed it. And we drove across country. We had a rider truck. My horses were traveling in air-conditioned air ride comfort. You know, those big rig horse fans that you see on the interstate sometimes. And we were in a big rider truck because Paul collected wine and would not have that shipped because he said, they'll park it in the sun and I'll go, I'm taking my own wine with us. I was like, oh, my God. You know, so we're driving with like 4 or 5 cats in cages and all this damn wine and some of our furniture in the back of it, this big rider truck. And we got across country. We made it to the farm 5 minutes till midnight on my 40th birthday. And what was funny was it was storming. It was the worst storm, just lightning and, terrible. And my driveway is very, very long. The property, the house sits at the end of the property, and the driveway divides two pastures. So you can't see the house from the road, and you just come down this really long driveway. And I'd had a woman that had a house check business, that would come by and check on your house once or twice a week and make sure nobody broke it in, that sort of thing. The people that had built my house had put gates up at the top of the driveway, and so she had locked those because I had sent furniture and stuff ahead to, so we wouldn't get robbed. And she put a padlock on that gate, and she had keys cut, and she mailed those keys to me in Los Angeles, so I had those keys. So we're getting in, it's like 5 minutes till midnight, and I mean, it is a hell of a storm. I'm sure it was a tornado warning. It was that bad. And there's no street lights on my road. The road that I live on is is wide enough for two cars. It's kind of like an English country lane, really, really narrow. No street lights at all. It is pitch black. You can only see when the lightning's flashing. And I jump out of the car, the truck, in this driving rain, and the freaking key doesn't work in the padlock. Ugh. We can't open it. And we're like, oh, my God, what are we going to do? And it's like, well, we're going to have to just climb over the gate. Well, we got these cats in crates, So that's how – so I turned 40 with climbing over the gate and Paul passing me a cat and another cat. So I'm carrying two cats in cages, and he's carrying two cats in cages. And the driveway is like a quarter of a mile long. And it's gravel, and it's puddled. And I'm running down with these intermittent shrieks every time lightning would just crack right over your head. It's just pitch black lightning is just crashing all around. I'm just like, ah! And the cats are screaming, and it's pitch black, and you can only see when you get that flash of lightning. So we finally make it into the damn house, and she had put up a big banner across the kitchen saying, "Happy birthday!" And there was a cake in the fridge. And the cats were just furious. They were soaked and freaking out. I mean, you can imagine what it was like for them. We sat down. It was like midnight and ate cake because there was no other food in the fridge. There might have been a beer. Probably had beer and cake for my 40th birthday. But it was great. And I remember when we left Los Angeles, like the last week we were there, we lived pretty decadently because living in West Hollywood, we were 5 minutes from Beverly Hills. We were eating it all week long at really nice restaurants that we liked in Beverly Hills, saying, when we move to Landrum, we're never going to be able to eat like this again. There's like a Pizza Inn, there's the Carriage House, right. And Brandon's restaurant, that was it. And we were in I love Northern Italian food, and so this one chef that knew us because we went all the time made like black linguine with shaved smoked salmon and a champagne cream sauce. Or eating that, like just almost like crying eating it, like I'll never be eating this burger again. And but once we got here, and Paul had to actually go back to Los Angeles for a few months to tie up his business, so I was here by myself. Man, after like a week, I was so settled in, so relaxed, that I felt like I'd been away from Los Angeles for a year. And it was the first time that I had slept through the night in probably 15 years, because you live in West Hollywood, and there's a robbery or murder in Los Angeles every 5 minutes, basically. So all night long, you would just be hearing sirens, because we live near a pretty big intersection. It's at 3 a.m., and we live next to Cedars-Sinai Hospital, too. So all freaking night long, police, ambulances, fire trucks. And so you never got 8 hours sleep, ever. And I remember my first night alone here with Paul not being here, and I woke up in the middle of the night because I was like, what is that? God, it sounds like there's a car outside, like somebody's sitting in a car and it's running. And I'm in the middle of nowhere out here. The driveway's really long, and I'm thinking, God, is somebody out there? And I'm like creeping down the stairs, like with a baseball bat, like, who the hell is that? What is that? And it was the hum of the refrigerator. It was so quiet, these deep country nights that I could hear the hum of the refrigerator. I was like, what the hell is that?
Was Paul a L.A. person, or was he okay with the farm stuff?
Paul, at that point in L.A., he was a writer. He had produced and been head writer on some late night TV shows. He always loved landscaping, and he was crazy about roses. And he just dove headlong from a comedy career into a rose nursery. And he is now. I
didn't see that one, but go ahead.
I didn't see it either. He's now, what he is people say, what does Paul do? And I say he's a rosarian, which is the actual term for it. But we have at the farm, we have like 400 test varieties of roses, and he founded the Biltmore International Rose Trials at the Biltmore Estate in Asheville. And what that means is when new roses come on the market, like, knockout roses, something like that, they have to go to these trials, and they're judged every season for a year. And they're judged on how resistant they are to disease or cold weather. And at the end of the year, the people that judge these other rosarians, they'll say, this finished first through 10th place. Well, those top finishing roses are the ones that, Home Depot ends up ordering 1 million of to sell, to be able to sell on. So that's how you get roses in your garden centers, is they come through these trials.
So people like me can actually get roses without knowing a whole bunch.
I mean, he was just flown up to New York to consult at the New York Botanical Garden, the Peggy Rockefeller Rose Garden, because it wasn't doing well. So they brought him up there to do soil samples and just look at their regime and what they were doing. And he's also partnered with Jackson and Perkins Roses. He does a lot of videos for them, and he's also the custom designer. I think this is very clever, Jackson and Perkins, it was Paul's idea to actually do this. Paul said, there's a lot of people that have a blank spot in their garden, and they don't, they love the idea of having a garden, but they don't know anything about flowers. So what they do is they go through the Jackson Perkins website, and they basically do a pencil sketch and say, all right, I have a 10-foot by 4-foot rectangle in front of my front house, and, I kind of like pinks and blues and yellows, and I kind of like that there, but I have no idea. And so Paul will get on the phone with you and say, well, here's the idea I have for your space, and here's what I think would look good. And then he sends you a selection of all the different perennials or roses that you could choose. You go, oh, I like that and that and that and that. And then he designs and puts them in, and then they're shipped to you. And if you get them and say, well, this is great, but I don't know how to plant these things, they are already in touch. There's like an Angie's List sort of thing for landscape companies all over America. So in each region, they have landscape companies that when your plants arrive, the company will come in and install them for you and plant them. And everything is included. So it's like the mulch, everything.
Wow, that's crazy. Okay, let's look to close things out for this round of our interactions together. Tell me what you have going now. Tell me about your horse racing, your riding, whatever else you have going on.
Well, I ride dressage, and that's a discipline in the equestrian arts, and I teach and I train here at the farm, and I was competing, but I've retired my competition horses, so I'm looking for my next young prospect to bring along and return to the competition ring. And to pay for the horses, to pay those bills, I still do stand-up. I do some theaters in the area. I don't like to really go on the road. I mean, I will go on the road if it's worth it, meaning like, if I have to get on a plane, it's usually a corporate gig. So I don't do comedy clubs, but I do like smaller theaters that seat like 300 to 500 people. I'm doing a show with Judy Tenuta here in Spindale. Do you remember Judy?
Oh, yeah.
Yeah, the petite goddess, and she did all those Dr. Pepper commercials, and people that are listening, you can go to YouTube and look her up. She's hysterical, and we're going to share the bill at the Foundation Arts Auditorium in Spindale, June 23rd. And then I might be going to Quebec in, August for a one-night thing. So that's what I mean. Like if I go somewhere, it's got to be a turnaround where I come back home because I got all these damn horses to look after.
Oh, right.
And then I write a syndicated humor column, and I just started a second column called Ask Auntie Pam, which is think a rural Dear Abby after a couple of cocktails. And that's who I am.
Right.
So people send me their dilemmas, and I answer them. And I just wrote my first novel, which is going really, really well. And it's called Girls Like Her. It's in bookstores, but it's also available at Amazon. And if you want it personally, because I have people that come to my book signings, but I did a book tour for almost 6 months last year when it came out, and I did book signings, and there's still people that want it personally signed. So what you can do is you can actually go through my website, which is comedianpamstone.com, and you can order it through the website, and then I can personally sign it to you, and it's shipped from there. And if you don't care about any of that crap, you can just order from Amazon. I'm really proud of it. It's the first novel I've ever written. I had the character in my head for 10 years, and I finally just sat down and just regurgitated it out. Like I wrote it in 8 weeks, and I wrote from, real authors sit down and they're disciplined, and they say, well, I write every morning from, 9 till 11. And I don't. When I write, I sit down and I write, and I don't stop till I finished it. And it was the most exhausting, dangerous thing I've ever done. Started out as a chick speech read, and it turned into something much more substantial, but I'm very proud of the effort. Everybody needs to buy it. Because it's great. The summer's coming up. It's a great read, and it'll help me pay all these damn horse bills.
Right. Well, I'll put the link on the show notes for the episode, so hopefully you'll get a few.
Yeah, please do. And I also produced a documentary about NASCAR racing before it was NASCAR called Running Flat Out, and you can find that too. You can do a search for that. And it was just interviews I really, really wanted to keep alive. The guys that did dirt track racing, before it was NASCAR, those guys are leaving us now. And I really, really wanted to get their stories because those were the guys that actually ran liquor, that actually ran moonshine.
Right.
And then when they got married and respectable, it was too dangerous to do. So then they did dirt track racing, which was, in these 39 flathead Fords with no helmets and no seat belts, and they used to tie the doors shut, so if they flipped, the doors would stay closed. So I wanted those stories, and by God, we got some incredible stories, and you can find that out there too. You just do a search for Running Flat Out.
Great. Well, I hope you actually come back to Marietta and check it out. There's a lot going on at the square now, and it's full of great restaurants, theaters. It's a lot more fun than probably the 70s when
I would love to see it. Dan Nash told me there was he's friends with the fellow that runs the Strand there, and I haven't been back. I mean, I have not been back. The last time I was in Atlanta was 2000, something like that. So I mean, I haven't been to the Marietta Square, and I can't tell you how long. Well over 20 years, 25 years, something like that. I remember Shillings. And that's
still there.
So I don't even know how the hell to get there anymore.
Right. Well,
because everything.
You got to go past the Big Chicken.
And I heard the Big Chicken is still there. So I'm really
it looks
excited
great.
about that.
They just redid it. Everything they put in wider sidewalks. It really looks legit.
Wow.
Stuff. Yeah, we'd love to have you come back.
I would love to. And is it still referred to as the 4-lane?
No, well, not by people that aren't as OM as perhaps you are. But yes, people do say that the old Marietta folks do.
We always called it the 4-lane, even though it's probably 8 lanes now.
Yeah, exactly.
Yeah.
Well, great, and I really, really appreciate your time. It's been a lot of fun. I've been smiling the whole time just listening to you talk about your life, and it's so cool for me to spend some time with somebody like you and has a really full life and done a bunch of cool things. So.
Oh, well, it's been, Marietta really honed me for that. So it was,
oh, good.
It was a really big deal. And when I went back to Los Angeles, when they brought Coach back, to do the reboot, and I went back to film the pilot 2 years ago, I felt like I was I felt like I was going back to California again for the first time from Marietta, Georgia.
Mm.
You know, it was like I hadn't been back in 17 years, and
wow.
and I felt like that little Southern bumpkin that was coming back. And our stage where we were shooting the pilot was right next to stage 40 where they do the voice. And I was such a little bumpkin redneck. I'd be calling Paul, and I'm like, the voice is right next to us. I'm fucking Blake Shelton. I can't believe it. You never change. You know, I never got to where I could act cool and like, well, you know, I'm an actor and I did this. It's like, oh my God,
yeah.
So, yeah.
Well, anyway, thanks again for all your time, and appreciate you getting with me and give me, you know, a full hour of your time.
You are so welcome, and I'll drop you an email about the contacts we were talking about earlier.
Gotcha.
Thank you so much.
All right, take care.
Okay.
Have a good evening.
All right.
Thanks once again for listening to Marietta Stories Podcast. We'll have a new episode out next week. Until then, if you go to the podcast app, you can subscribe. And if you wouldn't mind, tell a couple friends about the show so we can spread the word. Thanks.